Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to the official opening of the Sir John Monash Centre at the Australian National Memorial at Villers-Bretonneux, France. I'm Major General Mark Kelly, the Repatriation Commissioner at the Australian Department of Veterans Affairs, and I have my great privilege to be your Master of Ceremonies this afternoon. I will now broadly acknowledge our official guests. The Honourable Malcolm Turnbull MP, Prime Minister of Australia, and Ms Lucy Turnbull AO. Monsieur Edouard Philippe, Prime Minister of the French Republic. Ambassadors and members of the Diplomatic Corps. Senator the Honourable Maurice Payne, the Australian Minister for Defence. The Honourable Darren Chester MP, the Australian Minister for Veterans Affairs. Madame Daria Sek, the Secretary of State for the French Minister for the Armed Forces. The Honourable Warren Snowden MP, representing the Leader of the Federal Opposition. Our many other distinguished guests this afternoon, members of the Monash family and other descendants of all those who served in the First World War, ladies and gentlemen. I now invite the Honourable Darren Chester MP, the Australian Minister for Veterans Affairs, to formally welcome you to the Sir John Monash Centre.
Prime Ministers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Sir John Monash Centre. There's an old saying in Australia that to truly understand another person's life experience, you need to walk a mile in their shoes. The Sir John Monash Centre gives you a chance to walk a mile in the boots of the Australian soldiers, the young men who fought and ultimately repelled invading forces on the Western Front. While we can never fully understand the fear, the trauma, the heartache, we can immerse ourselves in their stories and keep our promise to never forget their sacrifice. The Sir John Monash Centre is a generous gift from this generation of Australians to the people of France. But it is nothing in comparison to the gift that previous generations have given. Australians voluntarily gave their sons, their husbands, their brothers, to help win the freedoms that we all enjoy today. They were all volunteers, and they served with distinction on many battlefields in World War I. As those troops left Australia more than 100 years ago to fight on foreign lands, they could never have known the challenges they would face and the sacrifices they would be forced to make. They demonstrated courage, determination, patriotism and mateship in the most horrific circumstances imaginable. At the end of the war, our grateful nations promised to never forget that service. The Sir John Monash Centre is all about keeping that promise. As you walk a mile in their boots, here and across the Western Front, remember the soldiers, remember their families, remember the bonds our great nations have formed over the past century. Remember also our modern-day veterans and service personnel. They keep us safe in a challenging world. Ladies and gentlemen, here at the Sir John Monash Centre, we will remember them, lest we forget.
Thank you, Minister. I now invite the Honourable Malcolm Turnbull MP, the Prime Minister of Australia, to move to the stage to receive the didgeridoo played by Dr. David Hudson. This didgeridoo was made especially by Dr. Hudson for his performance today to commemorate the service and sacrifice of all Australian soldiers on the Western Front. Dr. Hudson will now present the didgeridoo to Prime Minister Turnbull as a gift for the Sir John Monash Centre. The Prime Minister will now deliver his official address.
Thank you. Prime Minister of the French Republic, Edouard Philippe, Madame Geneviève Darrieussecq, Secretary of State to the Minister for the Armed Forces of France, Major General Thierry Coqueblain, Military Governor of Lille, General Jacques Hébras, Commander of the Northern Defensive Zone for the Gendarmerie, Senator Maurice Payne, Minister for Defence, the Honourable Darren Chester, Minister for Veterans Affairs, Air Chief Marshal Mark Binskin, Chief of the Australian Defence Force, members of the family of Sir John Monash, the Honourable Warren Snowden, representing the Leader of the Opposition, former Australian Prime Minister, the Honourable Tony Abbott, who announced this centre in 2015 and who, to his credit, has always advocated for a greater recognition in our history of the Australians' deeds, their service and sacrifice, their loss and their triumph here on the fields of France. Deputies, senators, Senator Hinch, members of Parliament, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, servicemen and women of France and Australia, veterans. Australians are hardly militaristic. Tomorrow, Anzac Day, does not commemorate a military victory. The Gallipoli campaign was a tragic and costly failure. We honour instead a triumph of the human spirit, courage, solidarity, resilience, and above all, mateship. But while we are never triumphalist, we should never forget the triumphs of arms won by the Australian forces in the midst of all of the horrors here in the Great War. And here, at the village of Villers-Bretonneux, exactly 1 century ago, with that Anzac spirit and the brilliant leadership of John Monash, the Australian forces won a momentous victory, the first of many in 1918. To truly appreciate John Monash and the more than 46,000 Australians who gave their lives for us out here on the Western Front, we need to stretch the boundaries of our imagination and see this landscape as they did. From the perfect geometry of these freshly sown fields and the immaculate lines of cottages in the village, we have to conjure up the smell and sound and fury of what was one of the greatest artillery bombardments in the history of warfare. The German commander Erich Ludendorff called his spring offensive the Vernichtungsschlacht, the Battle of Annihilation, which aimed to punch a hole in the Allied defences before the Americans arrived in force. And we get a sense of it from the letters those young Australians sent home. This is Thomas Taylor, a 21-year-old wireless operator who had worked at the post office in Mossvale. This is him recording what he saw at the break of dawn on Anzac Day 1918. Here we saw sights that made one's heart stand still with pity, for all along the road were stretcher bearers in their masks, leading out men totally blind and crying with the pain of gas burns. Dozens were stumbling along alone, while down the road were numbers sitting down, waiting for a shell to put them out of their misery. Thomas Taylor was lucky. The long rows of marble headstones here show how many were not. Listen to the account of John Alexander Rawes, an infantryman from Adelaide, whose name is inscribed on the walls behind us as one of those Australians whose grave has not been found. My tunic is rotten with other men's blood and partly splattered with a comrade's brains. It's horrible, but why should you people at home not know? Several of my friends are raving mad. I met 3 officers out in no man's land the other night, all rambling and mad, the poor devils. And try to imagine the sons and daughters and wives and mothers and fathers poring over those letters, or worse, waiting for letters that were never sent. This morning, Lucy and I stopped at the cemetery at Hayley Station at the grave of Lucy's great-uncle, Roger Forrest Hughes. Newly married, a young doctor, a resident at St Vincent's Hospital in Sydney, Roger enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force in 1916. Within 5 days of arriving on the banks of the River Somme, he was hit by a shell while treating a wounded digger. Roger died at the age of 26 in the arms of his brother, Lucy's grandfather, the fighter ace Flight Lieutenant Geoffrey Hughes. His squadron was nearby. 7 weeks later, Roger's wife, Aileen Marr, gave birth to their son, who himself was to die serving Australia in the Royal Australian Air Force in the Second World War. By the spring of 1918, the Bolsheviks had taken Russia out of the war, and the German forces on the Western Front were hugely reinforced by redeployments from the east. Ludendorff launched his massive spring offensive on the 21st of March to break the Allied lines, and one Allied defeat and retreat after another followed. Churchill described this offensive as the mightiest military conception and the most terrible onslaught which the annals of war record. On their second attempt, the Germans captured Villers-Bretonneux on the 24th of April. But in an assault which Sir John Monash later described as the real turning point of the war, the 13th and 15th Australian Brigades recaptured the town in the early hours of Anzac Day, 1918, and it ensured the Germans could not achieve their objective, the capture of Amiens and its vital railway hub. Monash did the meticulous planning. Brigadier General Pompey Elliott worked with instinct and passion, and together they launched the brilliant, ruthless counterattack that broke the German onslaught and helped to turn the tide of Europe's deadliest war. From here, it seems there was nothing Monash could not do. In May 1918, he was given command of the entire Australian Corps, the first time they'd been led by an Australian. Monash was above all a modern man, an engineer, legally trained, a lateral creative thinker, as literate as he was numerate. Before the war, he made a fortune deploying the latest Monier system of reinforced concrete construction. We see him in his khakis, bewhiskered and stern as generals were. But to think of Monash in our time, think of a man at the cutting edge of technology, pushing the boundaries of imagination and innovation. Every one of his men knew exactly where they were going, who they would encounter, and what they must achieve, and he knew everything depended on them. They were his mates, and so he made sure they had hot meals, dry clothes, and were rotated out of the front to recuperate as often as possible. The main thing is to always have a plan, he said. If it's not the best plan, it's at least better than no plan at all. He pioneered aerial supply drops and air reconnaissance in near real time, and he showed how to use the trench-busting power of armoured tanks. In short, he revolutionised warfare on the Western Front. On the 4th of July, Monash led Australian and American infantry in what was then the most sophisticated joint operation in history, involving the airdrops, artillery, and a line of British tanks in the Battle of Hamel. He planned to take the village in 90 minutes, but was famously 3 minutes late. That victory put the German army on the defensive right up until Armistice Day. And from that time on, Australians and Americans have fought side by side in every major conflict. In August, King George V came to the Somme and knighted Monash in the field, surrounded by his troops and captured trophies of war. By the end of the war, there was no one who doubted his battlefield prowess. The British Field Marshal, Bernard Montgomery, later judged Monash to be the best general on the Western Front in Europe. And Montgomery said the war might have been won sooner, and certainly with fewer casualties, if Monash had been in command of the British armies as well. And that's why we're naming this centre after Sir John Monash. But it is a memorial to all the Australians who served in this terrible war. From the private soldiers, like my grandfather Fred Turnbull, to our greatest general. We need to know the appalling suffering of the Western Front. Before Monash boarded his transport ship in December 1914, he and 80 other Jewish military men crowded into the St Kilda Synagogue in Melbourne. Monash opened the Ark to bring out the Torah scroll, and the young rabbi, Jacob Danglo, told the congregation, "Against the shadow of the darkest calamity which has ever befallen this world, there is a just God judging in the world, who will not allow might to crush right, who will not permit militarism to override morality. Never has the patriotism of His Majesty's Jewish subjects been more wholehearted, never their loyalty more devoted than it is today at this season of grave national peril." They prayed for king and country, but they did so within a framework of universal principles which we recognise today. Monash expanded and enriched our conception of our nation in both forceful and subtle ways. We must never forget the lives that are honoured here at Villers-Bretonneux. We must never forget the 11,000 fallen Australians whose bodies were never recovered, their names etched here on the Australian National Memorial, brothers, husbands, fathers and sons. We must stretch our minds to imagine what it was like for the 320,000 Australians who served overseas, all volunteers, every one of them, from a population of less than 5 million. 60,000 never made it home, and you see their names on the stone memorials in almost every Australian country town, and you can count the brothers and the fathers and the sons. Prime Minister Philippe and I were talking about this just before we came here, and how he related how in every small French village there is also there a monument to the fallen. Prime Minister, both our countries lost the finest of their generation in this dreadful conflict fought here for our freedom and for the freedom of France. And there were, of course, the same number again who died before their time from the poison gas and the illness and the trauma known as shell shock before we called it PTSD. There was barely a household in Australia that was not deeply and personally affected. And we must remember all of this, especially us, our nation's leaders, reminding us why we always strive to resolve conflict by peaceful means, and when we do put our troops in harm's way, to do so with the resources, the leadership and the considered strategy that best ensures their success and safe return. This new centre expresses our gratitude for all our men and women who fought and continue to fight for our values and our interests, as the Minister reminded us a moment ago. Freedom, parliamentary democracy, the rule of law, mutual respect, the equality of men and women and a fair go, the opportunity to get ahead but lend a hand to those who fall behind. One of the names inscribed at the memorial is that of Private Leon Turb. He is one of about 150 Australian diggers who our National Archives lists as being born in France. Turb is also listed on an honour roll at his hometown on Ile-Dieu, off the west coast of France, alongside 6 other men who share the same last name. That makes 7 from the same extended family, in different uniforms, who all died fighting for a common cause. Tomorrow, here in France, at home in Australia, in Baghdad and Kabul, all around the world, thousands of Australians will be gathering in the moments before dawn on Anzac Day. Young servicemen and women, today's Anzacs, will join the veterans of years past and countless others who know that every freedom we enjoy has been hard won and hard held in every generation by the men and women who put their lives on the line, wearing our uniform under our flag. And in the midst of the stone and the steel and the glass of this serene monument, we know that the best way to honour the diggers of 1918 is to support the servicemen and women, the veterans and their families of today, lest we forget.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I would now like to invite Monsieur Edouard Philippe, the Prime Minister of the French Republic, to deliver his official address.
Prime Minister, Madame la Ministre, Messieurs les parlementaires, Mesdames et Messieurs les élus, Messieurs les maires, Mesdames et Messieurs, il est maintenant tout seul avec sa petite vie de 19 ans et il pleure parce qu'elle le quitte. Ce jeune homme qui pleure est allemand. L'auteur de cette phrase est allemand aussi. Il s'agit d'Éric Maria Remarque. Je la tire de son œuvre, bien connue en France, À l'Ouest, rien de nouveau, qu'il a écrite en s'inspirant des horreurs qu'il a vécues, comme des millions d'autres, dans les tranchées. En venant ici, en découvrant ce centre et le parcours de visite, en apercevant les noms des 11 000 Australiens morts pour la France et pour la liberté, je n'ai pu m'empêcher de songer à la terrible solitude que ces milliers de jeunes Australiens ont dû ressentir en voyant leur courte existence les quitter sur une terre étrangère. Une terre étrangère, une terre lointaine, une terre froide, argileuse, qui n'avait sans doute ni la couleur, ni la texture de leur terre à eux, celle du bush. Une terre étrangère et lointaine qu'ils ont défendue pied à Fromelles dans le Nord, à Bullecourt dans le Pas-de-Calais, et bien entendu ici, à Villers-Bretonneux, comme si c'était la leur, et c'est la leur. Pour personne, la terre n'a autant d'importance que pour le soldat, écrit toujours Remarque. Elle est son unique ami, son frère, sa mère. Sa peur et ses cris gémissent dans son silence et dans son asile. Pour beaucoup de jeunes Australiens, cet asile a été le dernier. Pour beaucoup, cette terre a été la dernière confidente d'une pensée, d'une parole qui s'adressait à un proche du bout du monde, des proches qui ne devaient apprendre la triste nouvelle que plusieurs mois plus tard. Monsieur le Premier ministre, c'est un Français féru d'histoire qui vous le dit, il est rare d'inverser le cours d'une bataille. Et il est encore plus rare d'inverser 2 fois le cours d'une bataille, presque coup sur coup. La première fois se produit le 24 avril 1918, ici même. Du côté allemand, on veut en finir. Dans une lettre qu'il adresse à sa femme en janvier 1918, le brigadier général australien Harold Elliott, dit Pompey, écrit « L'ennemi envoie tous les meilleurs hommes du front russe et tous les prisonniers que nous recevons ne font que raconter des récits sur les préparatifs que les Boches, je cite, font pour nous régler notre compte de manière définitive cette fois. » Un des objectifs est de prendre Amiens. Pour y parvenir, il faut passer par Villers-Bretonneux. Le 17, les obus pleuvent. Les troupes australiennes encaissent le choc. Elles font mieux qu'encaisser puisque le 24, à 22 heures, avec l'aide des Britanniques, elles contre-attaquent. Après des combats d'une rare violence, dont certains se sont déroulés sur le lieu même du mémorial, elles repoussent les Allemands et se couvrent d'une gloire éternelle. Et c'est là qu'intervient le second renversement. C'est là qu'intervient un homme méticuleux, sage et obstiné dont vous avez parlé, Monsieur le Premier ministre. Un ingénieur, fils d'immigrés juifs prussiens, qui a travaillé dur pour payer ses études et qui, très tôt, a rejoint l'armée de réserve de la jeune nation australienne. Cet homme, c'est John Monash. Le 4 juillet 1918, les Alliés reprennent l'offensive. Mais grâce à Monash, ils le font d'une manière nouvelle, en combinant l'action de chars avec celle de l'infanterie, en utilisant les chars en feu roulant, ce qui permet aux hommes de progresser dans une relative sécurité. En 93 minutes, les troupes atteignent leurs objectifs, et si l'on retient ces 93 minutes, c'est parce que, en effet, Monash, associant un flegme tout britannique à une précision toute prussienne, avait calculé que l'opération durerait 90 minutes, 3 minutes de retard, 3 minutes de trop dans ces circonstances, 3 minutes terribles dans ces circonstances. Mais enfin, il n'était pas loin du compte. À un moment où, dans cette guerre, on se battait des heures, des jours, parfois, pour gagner quelques mètres. Cette stratégie qui a surpris les Allemands eux-mêmes, les Alliés l'utiliseront par la suite à une échelle beaucoup plus large, avec les résultats que l'on connaît. L'ingénieur australien se hissait ainsi, par son instinct lumineux, au niveau des meilleurs tacticiens alliés, du français Estienne et du britannique Fuller. Se déroule alors l'épisode qui m'a peut-être le plus frappé, celui durant lequel le roi George V, roi du Royaume-Uni et des Dominions, empereur des Indes, le petit-fils de la reine Victoria, anoblit sur le champ de bataille le fils d'immigrés juifs prussiens ayant refait leur vie sur les terres d'Australie. Un geste du fond des âges, qui rappelle celui d'un autre grand roi, français celui-là. Je veux évidemment parler de François Ier, qui, le 15 septembre 1515, sur le champ de bataille de Marignan, adouba le chevalier Bayard. Le chevalier sans peur et sans reproche. Eh bien, grâce au geste de George V, l'Australie a son Bayard. C'est en quelque sorte le Bayard du bush. Cette histoire, ces histoires, nous sont inaccessibles. La boue, les rats, les poux, le gaz, la peur, la faim, le froid, les camarades fauchés, nous ne pourrons jamais vraiment nous les représenter. Il faut les raconter. Il faut entendre ce qu'a pu être ce moment de vie et ce moment de mort. Il faut les montrer, encore et encore, montrer le visage juvénile de ces hommes dont la jeunesse s'est perdue dans la boue des tranchées. Le quotidien de ces volontaires venus d'ailleurs qui n'ont écouté que leur courage, celui de leurs 20 ans, qui n'ont écouté que leur amour de la patrie, celles de leurs parents ou de leurs grands-parents, pour mourir ici, à Villers-Bretonneux. Le montrer grâce à la technologie, bien sûr, mais sans jamais quitter des yeux les noms qui figurent sur le mémorial, qui, eux, ne sont pas virtuels. Il faut aussi incarner, vivre et transmettre l'amitié qui unit désormais la population de la Somme, Monsieur le Président, de la région des Hauts-de-France, Monsieur le Président, ses élus, aux milliers d'Australiens qui, chaque année, viennent se recueillir ici. À ses descendants, je veux dire ici cette chose toute simple que l'on apprend, je crois, dans les écoles, ici comme ailleurs. We will never forget Australians. Et auquel vous répondez en Australie, lest we forget. Nous n'oublierons jamais leur courage. Nous n'oublierons jamais leur sacrifice, celui de leurs 20 ans, celui de la vie heureuse et tranquille qu'ils auraient pu mener à des milliers de kilomètres d'horreur que rien ne les obligeait à partager. Nous n'oublierons jamais qu'il y a 100 ans, une jeune et courageuse nation du bout du monde est entrée dans l'histoire en écrivant avec nous parmi les pages les plus belles et les plus dures de notre aventure collective. Lest we forget.
Merci, Prime Minister. Ladies and gentlemen, please direct your attention to the screen for a short presentation on the Sir John Monash Centre.
The prospect of a term in the first line fills me with all sorts of anticipations. What is the feeling of one under fire for the first time?
It was terrible. It is the cruelest method of warfare of the lot.
As soon as I was out of sight, I sat and cried.
You and your pals laugh at the dinner table of your life in the army. But I know that there is a hideousness you do not speak of, for it is in your eyes.
It seemed that there was nothing to do but go straight forward and die hard.
There was no cheering, no undue excitement. I think we all grinned. The event was too big to be appreciated all at once.
The battalion was drifting to pieces. The links that connected it with the unforgotten dead seemed to be snapping one by one.
I now invite the Prime Minister of Australia and the Prime Minister of the French Republic back to the stage to unveil the commemorative plaque to officially open the Sir John Monash Centre.
I now declare the Sir John Monash Centre open.
Thank you, Prime Ministers. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for the national anthems of France and Australia. Please be seated. I now invite the children of Villers-Bretonneux College Jacques Brel to the stage to perform their specially composed song, Nous n'oublierons jamais, We Will Never Forget, as well as an old Australian favourite, Waltzing Matilda.
Bienvenue à
Please be seated. Thank you, children, for your wonderful tribute to our Australian soldiers. Merci. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the official opening of the Sir John Monash Centre. Thank you for your attendance. Could I ask you to please remain seated while the Prime Ministers of Australia and the French Republic and their official party move to the reception area to the rear of the tent to meet the children.